Blonde, a movie that I consider myself a gentleman, but I don't prefer blonde. David, I understand that we're probably going to be on approaching this movie from somewhat different angles as far as appreciation. Andrew Dominik's new movie is, it's spurred its own share of controversy and attention, and not dissimilar to Olivia Wilde's movie "Don't Worry, Darling." A lot of buzz kind of building up to the release, and now it's finally out. It had a limited kind of theatrical experience, and now it's on Netflix, so everyone can kick back, quote unquote, relax, and watch this 2 hour and 47 minute historical fiction epic starring Ana de Armas, and it's about the life of Marilyn Monroe.
Right. Or at least from what, 1930? Well, yeah, 1933 till from the time she was 7 years old till her death in 1962 at age 36.
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts about this movie, but I want to kick things off on a positive note. David, tell me what do you think of Blonde? And do you want to kind of I mean, you gave a very, very high level synopsis, but do you want to kind of tell us what we're in for this movie?
Well, you're in for the first NC-17 movie to hit streaming.
Is that true?
It says here, it's the first NC-17 rated film to be released on a streaming service. So probably a new NC-17 film to be released on a streaming service. Wikipedia doesn't lie.
Never. But no, I consider that, that's probably true. But considering the stuff, a lot of the things they put out on streaming services isn't rated anyway, really. It's just like, it's, and as far as explicit stuff, I have a feeling I know why it got the NC-17 rating.
Oh, yeah.
Because
a lot of nipples.
It's not the nipples.
Well, the cervix.
No, not even that.
It's the fellatio.
You're getting close.
How closer can I get?
There is a scene of an erect penis that is on screen for approximately an eighth of a second. And I know because I rewound, because I'm watching him like, wait, that wasn't. And then, it was.
When she's with the two sons of famous actors?
No, that's, it's when she's with the studio exec who, quote unquote, gives her the big break. And it's not even in that initial scene. Well, it's not even in that scene. It's later in the film when she flashes back to it. They actually show that bit, I think, as a bit of not symbolism, but to kind of multiply or magnify the horror that she was going through. But yeah, that's the rating system is weird, so you can't show that in an R-rated film. So I have a feeling that's like the third F-bomb that gets you the R.
So got it. I look, I get all the. I understand a lot of the stances of this movie being reductive and distasteful. I know that people have problems with the Joyce Carol Oates novel from 2000, which this is based off of. I've never read the book. I knew that was also somewhat of a historical. You're going to pull it up, aren't you? Oh, no, you're not. Grab your coffee.
I'm pulling my coffee.
I thought you were gonna. Here's the book.
No, but I do want to talk about the book a bit more because I do intend to read it.
I figured you would. Yeah. And that was also, I think, a CBS mini movie or something like that. Back in around 2000. But it also was directed by two women, and a lot of people think that has a better. It's a better adaptation because it's more sensitive to, I guess, what Marilyn went through. This apparently is not. I guess, I understand the criticism and the complaints and the vitriol around this movie. I guess I appreciate it more than others because it's not a by the numbers biopic, which I'm so tired of. It's funny that this is coming out the same year as like Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. I don't know if you saw that, but
not yet. No.
Yeah, I mean that's Baz Luhrmann. And Elvis and Marilyn Monroe are kind of somewhat, fell to the same kind of celebrity gaze. Obviously this is a little different because this is all pretty much male gaze. But her exploitation, I think, was a lot more abusive and obvious than maybe his. But I guess I appreciated Andrew Dominik's approach to the material. I felt like it was very, at times, beautifully filmed and acted, and especially, just it was almost like a dreamscape. A lot of it feels very psychologically interior driven, meaning especially even in the opening when we're sharing screen time with the young actress who plays 7-year-old Norma Jean, and her mom, Gladys, played by the great Julianne Nicholson. That whole sequence, there's a moment where they're driving frantically through the Hollywood Hills during a fire, and there's just all these embers and everything, and there's just heightened panic and everything, and it literally just felt like we are inside this young girl's memories, or we are in the memories of a young woman who's looking back on her past, and I definitely felt that.
I do want to, before I forget, I do want to say there's another kind of, I'll say it, a breathtaking visual, almost contrast to that, involving water. I don't remember exactly which scene, because there's a lot of scenes in this movie.
Are you talking about the transition during the kind of sex scene where it goes into the Niagara waterfall? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Those are cool things.
It was amazing.
Visually,
it was like the bed sheets.
Yeah.
Like it's a kind of a low angle over the edge of a bed, and she's kind of leaning over it, and the white bed sheets begin to ripple and then morph into Niagara Falls. And it's like, wow.
I mean, there's a lot of that in this. I mean, we, siege to like a whole screen filled with sperm. There's scenes where we just are looking at a fetus inside of a womb. There's a lot of things that just feel almost like, say either David Lynch or Terrence Malick directed this. And I've definitely appreciated that approach. It's, to me, very artful, and I don't. It made me care less about, and this may sound bad, but it made me care less about accuracy, and more. The more I got involved in its artistry, I guess. Yes, there's a lot of uncomfortable scenes in this movie, and some of it is a little tonally jarring. Like, when she does get, raped by Mr. Z in that first reading, and as soon as she leaves his office, it's kind of like upbeat, music, da, 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 it's like, and so I don't know. I mean, that happens kind of early in the film, and so that it also kind of carries throughout, this kind of upbeat music while uncomfortable things are happening. So I'm not sure what exactly it's saying there, but that is still very interesting to me. And I think Ana de Armas is pretty amazing in this movie. I think if anything, I would have some issues with some of the writing, but other than that, I think the delivery of and what is offered here is pretty compelling, and I was I wouldn't say entertained, but I was I was enraptured, let's say, and almost kind of maybe uneasy, which is appropriate, and I felt just kind of conflicted at the end. It's saying some things that we kind of already know about celebrity and how we treat how we look at the female figure and prop it up as a sex symbol, and especially back then in the 40s and 50s. So I mean, I guess that's why I would say I definitely liked it more so than most.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the the visual style, one of the things, particularly in the third act, where reality for her is starting to fall apart because she's heavily hooked on drugs, and that's ultimately what is her undoing. I was reminded of Darren Aronofsky's Mother when it gets really trippy towards the end of that that movie. Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void. There's a lot of the you are inside a woman while things are going on sexual imagery that I think not necessarily cribbed from there, but it's just as effectively done. Yeah, I did some. You posted in our chat. We were kind of talking about this. A link to an article. 8 books to read after you see Blonde. I would probably retitle that 8 books to read instead of watching Blonde. Now, I have not read those books. I haven't read the Joyce Carol Oates novel either. One of the criticisms, I don't know the criticisms of the book, but I know of the criticisms of Dominik's adaptation of the book, which is that it centers exclusively, and I mean exclusively, on Marilyn Monroe's pain and suffering, whereas the novel explores her navigating these horrible things as a recognizable human being. What is she thinking about? What does she think of her career, her childhood, being used by all these men and her various marriages and all that. And that's completely stripped out of the film. Now, that is an artistic choice, but it's not a choice that I think is a good look for a movie that feels like a reaction to Me Too and Time's Up, but it's almost going about it in the worst way possible, because Ana de Armas is being exploited in this movie. Like, Marilyn Monroe as a character, we don't know anything about her. If you didn't know anything about Marilyn Monroe, and this is your first experience of her, you'd wonder, is she an idiot? And I don't mean because she keeps going, and getting into all these situations, but she just doesn't come off as smart. Yeah, she's read Chekhov, I guess, and can kind of talk her way around it with, people who don't respect her. But she doesn't seem to have any sense of agency. This is very much a jumping around the chapters kind of a life story. So she'll show up and she's all of a sudden in a threesome with these 2 people who you find out are the sons of Edward G. Robinson and Charlie Chaplin. We don't find that out until, several minutes into this tryst. She ends up marrying Arthur Miller. She ends up with Joe DiMaggio, neither of whom I believe are actually named. Maybe Miller was.
I think Miller was, yeah.
But
in the novel, I think they're like the playwright and the ex-athlete.
They use pseudonyms. Yeah, that's true. Because we only get the worst parts of these chapters in her lives, this is where I think that a traditional biopic structure would have helped it. I feel like you can go so far out of your way to resist convention that you end up merging into abstraction. And in a material like this, abstraction can just end up being, here is 2 hours and 45 minutes of a troubled young woman being raped, sexually glorified, and abused, and dying from a drug overdose. And so I wonder, what am I supposed to get out of watching this movie, aside from undeniably beautiful artistry? And one other thing I'll say before I quit ranting, I don't think Ana de Armas is that good in this movie. She spent 9 months apparently with a dialect coach and still ends up sounding nothing like Marilyn Monroe. In fact, there was some controversy that came out because, when people first saw the trailer, they're like, why is she keeping her Cuban accent? And it kind of comes and goes. She sort of masks it with the breathiness at times, but there is a monologue that she gives during a blowjob of JFK that is full on, like, she is not even trying. This is like her warming up before the camera rolls.
And that's granted, she's not that talented where she can give a monologue while giving a blowjob, but it's an internal dialogue that you hear.
Yes. I thank you for clarifying, because
I'm like, wait a minute, did I miss that?
It was somewhere in hour 6. No, but and I feel bad saying this, because I think that she is, a fine actress. I like her. She was the highlight for me of the last James Bond film.
Yeah.
I hated everything about Knives Out, and that kind of, she got swept up into that, but she was probably the least bad thing about that movie, in my opinion. So I like her as an actress, but just as Marilyn Monroe, I feel like if they had gone the Joyce Carol Oates allegory route and just had this be a fictitious drama about a starlet in the 1950s, who gets swept up. She could even be a blonde. Maybe she's a Cuban actress, and that's the whole kind of a thing. But as Marilyn Monroe, she is utterly unconvincing, except for the look. But how many people have played Marilyn Monroe over the years? Ashley Judd, Michelle Williams.
Yeah.
If people are interested in a story about Marilyn Monroe that explores her struggle with the fame and the interpersonal stuff, I recommend My Week with Marilyn, which came out about 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's great. And I think that this the character of Marilyn Monroe, or I prefer Norma Jean, is better served in snippets of her life, like My Week with Marilyn. It's literally in the title. And just because she is such an icon, I'm not even, minus how she sounds, minus if you've ever seen a movie or you haven't seen a movie or whatever, just the way she looks in pop culture, and so everybody, even if you've been born after she was born or died after she died, you still know her. And so because she shows up everywhere in pop culture. So she's I mean, she's obviously known to all, but so I think it's better to just hone in and examine on such a character by taking either like a week or a month or whatever, or a certain experience that she's had. I agree. So that's why I felt like in the beginning, like having us look at her relationship or non-relationship with her parents, and her starting out, I thought was really interesting. But then when Dominik, goes to like the 7-year itch with the skirt flying up and all these other hits these kind of benchmark pop culture images that we're familiar with, and he does it in a very artful way and very very compelling. I just feel like that is a little bit a little on the nose, I guess.
Here's the thing. It's a Netflix movie.
Yeah.
And I feel like we say this a lot and it's becoming a cliche, but in this case, I think it really could have worked, because the Joyce Carol Oates book, again, we haven't read it, but it's like 738 pages long. To me, this should have been a Netflix series where each week, call it 7 weeks, each week is a different chapter of her life. You could have even framed it as each week, each episode opens with a tabloid or a Hollywood, Hollywood Reporter story about her latest project, and then, or her latest marriage to someone. And then that hour explores how she got into it, what happened, what was the result, how she felt about it. You can still show the trauma, but give some context for it. And then once it's over, you've got this 7 or 8 or 13 episode tapestry of a life of a person that you can recognize as a person. One of the things that I think this movie is an unintentionally misogynist movie. I don't think anybody who's involved in it would consider themselves, against women. But if you just look at the way that Marilyn is reacted to by the men in her life, especially early on, they see her as a pretty face. Whenever she opens her mouth, though, she just starts rambling and spouting stuff that nobody quite understands what the hell she's talking about. And so there are several looks on the faces of people, casting directors. Joe DiMaggio played, I think, really well by Bobby Cannavale. The look on their face is like, is she crazy? Like, I feel like I just ran across her, on the street yelling at pigeons. And I don't think that it was intended for, if anything, I would think that the intention would be for them to be so insensitive as to, think of her as, being stupid. But me, as watching this movie without any context for this character, I can see where they're coming from, sitting down and listening to this nonsense and being like, I'm supposed to put you in a movie? That's just my read on it.
Yeah, I mean, I did pick that up, and I think the way I read that is that I feel like there was a lot going on. We gradually see that there's a lot going on in her internally, emotionally, and like for example, there's that scene in the filming of Some Like It Hot, where I think like, I forget what it is. I think she maybe hears like a baby crying or something like that, and it triggers something internally about the loss that she's had. She was never able to basically get pregnant. Uh, in this movie, and I guess in the book too, it mentions we see that she went through abortions. I don't think she ever in real life she didn't go through any abortions. It was all
Is
just
that
yeah. From what I read recently, she wasn't able to carry a pregnancy through term due to some severe endometriosis. Um, but so they got to add that in there for, I guess, dramatic sake. And I'm not blaming Dominik. I mean, that's probably in Joyce Carol Oates novel as well, but I guess he's culpable as well. I don't know. But I so anyways, in that scene on the set, something she's supposed to respond to the other actor, and something internally is kind of triggering her. And I feel like a lot of times the way she's responding to things, whether it's trying to be Marilyn Monroe, whether it's trying to be Marilyn Monroe as a character in a movie, um, there's a lot of internal conflict that even she doesn't know how to deal with. Like when Joe DiMaggio was like, "So hey, how'd you get started?" You know, and at, you could tell. And I think this is another great scene with Armas is like you could tell she doesn't know how to respond to that. Like started, I don't even know if I have started. You could tell that all these things are swirling in her head. Like, have I started? I don't know if I've started. And she's like, "What? How? What do you mean? Like, how did I get started? I guess I was discovered." And I would imagine that that's probably not, a response that's foreign to, many other, young, beautiful actors in that period. Is like you're just discovered as like, hey, you're beautiful. You want to be in movies, and or something like that. And she started out as a pinup girl and a calendar girl and stuff like that, and that's how she got the name Marilyn Monroe. That's where it came from, and then she started getting into movies. But I just feel like there's maybe some of the reasons why she kind of responds in a kind of indecipherable manner, and says things kind of that are kind of like off, is because she herself, and this is what I gathered, she herself is still trying to figure things out, and she's kind of directionless as far as her career and her identity.
right? I guess my issue is that it comes off as very one-dimensional because Hollywood celebrities don't get to be where they are without being able to give interviews where they, can come off as relatable people. They're in the stratosphere, but you can say, "Hey, come see my new movie," or, it was so great working with this cast and crew that we're like a family. I don't get the feeling that this version of this character could have given one of those interviews.
No, I
We
don't
never
think
see
so either.
we never see her with the press. We see her on red carpets where there's flash bulbs going off and she never says anything. She's just like being ushered into the theater and everything. But I don't even buy this as a version of a troubled celebrity. You look at something like The Aviator, which is about a rich and powerful, famous person who's very much into the movies, and you see his decline, but you also understand how he got to be a global icon and how shattering it was that this kind of childhood trauma and debilitating, mental state kind of took him out, and it was a tragedy. This, it's sad, but I don't feel the same way as if I was watching the de-evolution of a person. It's just sort of like someone reading a bunch of symptoms to me and say, "This really happened to somebody."
Yeah, I mean, again, we're not given the opportunity to see. There's no moments, like you said, of like, say, press junkets or something like that, or interviews necessarily. And I don't even know. I would imagine that she was part of, like, marketing for a movie that she was in, but at to what extent back then, I don't know. Maybe, honestly, I feel like maybe they didn't want to hear from her, and all they wanted to do was take photos of her on the red carpet, and they wanted to hear less from her and just see her more and just gaze. Um, that's what I gathered.
And the troubling part is, and again, I'm not the world's foremost Marilyn Monroe expert, but
Neither am I.
in doing some bit of research on the internet, based on what you'd sent me down this kind of rabbit hole with these, read these books.
Yeah.
And so I was reading reviews of those books and critiques, and people were saying Marilyn Monroe was a pop cultural icon and a
Right.
towering figure in Hollywood who, that Kim Kardashian wore her dress to some premiere or something like a couple years ago. It was like a huge deal because it's like an iconic dress, right? So she is powerful, but she was also, from what I understand, savvy, very smart,
A
had,
good comedian.
yeah,
Yeah.
good. She's a hell of an actress.
Mhm.
I've seen a few of her movies. I'm like,
Mhm.
this is great. Watching her outburst on the set of Some Like It Hot, I'm like, I just, maybe that happened, but I don't buy it if I'm supposed to believe this is Marilyn Monroe. I feel like I'm watching a movie about generic starlet who lived a life very close to what people imagine Marilyn Monroe to have lived.
Do you feel like you don't buy it because there wasn't enough build up to that? Like it wasn't earned, or what?
It's just I'm having trouble reconciling the Marilyn Monroe that I know and have seen and everything with those kind of hysterical breakdowns.
Mm.
Now, maybe it was that this behavior was an incredibly well, kept secret for decades, or maybe it's that Joyce Carol Oates, in writing her historical fiction, said, "Hey, she was a woman in the 1950s in this, patriarchal, misogynist studio system. I bet she probably would have had a breakdown and ripped out her earrings and had blood gushing down her face. And she tells Billy Wilder to go, shove it." I don't know what's fact and fiction. And I understand this is an adaptation of a novel, but it's also sort of being, I didn't know it was a novel until I think you had sent me that list and I started reading about it. I'm like, I knew it was based on a book, but I just assumed it was a book with some kind of accuracy.
Yeah,
But it could be as accurate as Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer or
it could.
Hunter. Sorry.
It could. Yeah, yeah. It could. And I am kind of curious about the book. And I'm wondering again. I don't know too much about the writer Joyce Carol Oates. I haven't read. I know that she's kind of an acclaimed writer, and I haven't read much of or any of her stuff. But I'm wondering if she just took kind of these moments and say, this would be a lot more interesting if we expanded the truth here and veered used the truth as a skeleton, as a framing, and then extrapolated a lot more. Um, and I kind of feel like that's what Dominik does here is just he uses the like so many men use Marilyn. No, he uses he he uses the kind of the framing of like a biopic. Start from when they were younger, go to when they up to when they died, and I just feel like he's doing something a lot more interesting and different than what we typically see. There's no denying that.
Well, visually, sure. But I mean,
Mhm.
let's talk connective tissue. This movie is 2 hours and 45 minutes. And yet it sort of has the Jesus problem from the Bible, where it goes from, hey, he's a little kid, and then you jump to, hey, he's an
He's
adult.
in his
Does she
30s.
know?
Yeah.
Right. And so we go from she gets dropped off at this orphanage, and then it cuts to she's flipping through photographs of her nudes from when she was like, or the not necessarily nudes, I don't think, but
late late teens or something. Yeah.
right, but she's doing all this kind of glamour modeling, and then she's going for audition. Like, okay, how did she get from being an orphan to, going to Hollywood? Why did she want to become an actress? I know there's this whole tie with her father, but given the kind of the weird mystique around her dad, I mean, was she trying to like literally track her dad down? Why is this a big problem? She starts getting these letters from her father, which I hate to say it, but I figured it out the instant the first letter showed up that that wasn't really her dad. And you know how
Yeah.
I did it?
Yeah.
Sloppy filmmaking, because we get a narration of, dear Norma Jean, I'm your dad. I'm sorry it took me so long to reach out, but I saw you're making movies now or whatever, and I want to reconnect. I'll reach out to you again at some point. Maybe someday we'll get together. I'm like, I'm doing the math. The first time we see her dad is in a picture framed on a cracked bedroom wall, which is, I'm sure, very symbolic. But he's an older guy. He's like, probably in his 30s. He's like kind of got that Hollywood leading man thing of the
Mhm.
1930s. So by the time he reaches out to her, he's going to have that older man rasp in his voice. This
Right.
guy who's reading the letter sounds like he's 25. Turns out he was, because it was a big joke played by Charlie Chaplin Jr.
Yeah.
sending her all these letters for years. Just this
That
cruel game.
that could have been avoided if the narration of reading a guy reading the letter was more of like a voice we didn't recognize, or an older man's voice. That would have been
Exactly.
a way to get around it. I did pick that up at some point, and it's a cruel, manipulative thing that was done to her. We don't know. I don't know if that actually happened or what, but um,
And
it's
he sends her after he dies of an overdose. Well, no, wait a second. Let me, so I guess it was
it was right
Charles Chaplin
before.
Jeweler. Well, Charlie Chaplin Jr. and I guess Edward G. Robinson Jr. were probably colluding, because it's after Chaplin chokes on his own vomit and dies that Robinson says, "Hey, Charlie or Kaz had something he wanted me to send
Left
to you."
you
So he sends
a
her,
gift. Yeah.
a gift of tiger, like the stuffed tiger she had from when she was a kid, or at least it's a replica of the tiger. And there was a note saying, "There never was a loving father," blah, blah, blah. But I'm just rolling my eyes, because when she opens it up and she pulls out the tiger, I'm like, this is her rosebud. It's just,
Yeah, a lot of people are saying that. Fine, I get it. I think it is this cruel thing that was done to her, and it's just one more cruel thing that was done to her. And she in this movie, she is seemingly a character who doesn't get any relief or breaks, despite being a reaching mega stardom and a huge celebrity status. What does that really mean to her, and what it's never really explored, sure, but I feel like it is kind of still saying something about and it's more so saying something about those decades, 40s and 50s, than it is having anything to do with, like, say, Me Too or Time's Up or kind of thing. um I don't
well, I
think
mean, it has to be saying that, because there's a reason that this kind of a movie about Marilyn Monroe and the things it depicts in it is coming out now.
Hmm.
I mean, the movies are a product of their time. Why are we watching this now? And the entire movie is about her relationship with these savage, leering, uncaring men, and the women who are on the periphery, who are either uh, aghast that she doesn't understand, or she doesn't enjoy her fame, as when she's being, kind of fitted into that dress, like, "Oh, Marilyn, every woman in the country would kill to be you." And, it's ironic, everybody. Or it's, she's going into meet with JFK, and there's a woman crying in the room next to a, I don't know if that's supposed to be Jackie or
Yeah,
somebody
I didn't
else.
get that either.
Right. Or they're just, it's like nameless, crying, fawning women and leering, abusive,
Right.
rapacious men.
Right.
There's no
Yeah.
dimension. The only person who's kind of a shining light in this is the Arthur Miller character.
Kind of.
But
Yeah.
even that's the most of an arc we get to a relationship, but I don't think it really ends, right? She miscarries. They're all very sad. And then we cut to, I think, is when she goes to blow Kennedy.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell. I wasn't clear, at least not in this movie, whether at that point when she was Kennedy's guest. Um, we'll talk about that in a minute. But if she was still with Miller at the time, I'm not sure.
There was a time jump. It goes from, I have it written down, but I think it
Okay.
goes to like 62 or something. And last time
Okay.
I think was like late 50s, maybe.
Yeah, and so that scene with JFK it's again, it's another exploitive thing that she is subjected to. Uh, but it is kind of like, just there's some silliness to it that is a little bit like, okay, that is kind of funny. Like he's watching like what's happening with the Cuban Missile Crisis, I guess, or some stuff on the news, and
She's experiencing her own Cuban Missile Crisis. Sorry.
as she's unzipping him off camera, there's the black and white TV of like a rocket being erected, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just ridiculous.
And then when he
climaxes,
finishes,
yeah.
finishes in her mouth. I'm sorry to get graphic, everybody, but that's the movie you're in for if you choose to watch it. Then it cuts to all of a sudden UFOs exploding in this sci-fi movie. And, you know, I guess he's like a fire hose. He won't stop because there's countless UFOs crashing into buildings. Hey,
Yeah. Yeah.
For the audio podcast, I'm waving at David's dog, not saying, hey, that's
pretty demanding. Yeah. Sorry.
But no, I mean, like, it's again, the Marilyn Monroe JFK relationship has been the stuff of legend forever.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to see a movie that explores how did they discover each other? What was their relationship actually like? Was she just a plaything, or is this again a fabric of Joyce Carol Oates' imagination? Oh, JFK slept with a lot of women. He probably just got off and having a movie star come to his hotel for an afternoon and pleasure him and send her on his way. That might have happened again, but I don't buy any of it watching this particular film.
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird that he's having a conversation about his affair while he's doing that. He's talking to somebody about his affair with, we assume, Marilyn, while she's going down on him. And
then the receiver is lying in the bed and she hears something and she makes a remark about it. And then all of a sudden his hand comes up and clasps over her mouth and then she like blacks out. I'm like, that again, you use the term on the nose. The big conspiracy is that JFK or someone had her killed because she knew too much about, you know, the inner workings or something, or the affair could get out and kill them. Like, this is like 1990s made for TV, you know, nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the artistry and the visuals of the movie kind of, you know, won me over in the performances. I get it. I understand your criticism of it. No,
that's the thing. I'm shaking my hands in frustration because I'm like, yes, if this script was much better, and if Ana de Armas had spent 10 months with a voice coach and had a director who said, no, we're going to do it again, I would have been in love with this movie, because I think it's visually one of the most beautiful things I've seen all year, and yet I can't recommend that anybody watch it.
Yeah, that's a conflict for sure. As far as her keeping in a character with her accent and everything, I'm to be honest, I didn't really notice a whole lot of like Cuban slip ups. Maybe during one blow up towards like maybe the probably the third act, I guess. And maybe like that whole kind of paranoid, drugged out scene where she's like kind of it's one of the kind of the black and white scenes towards the end where she's in her home, and I guess she had just been, I don't know what was happening to her, but she's naked, walking around different places, and you know, you see like her torso is like very veiny and everything, and like when she's
like the night shot,
there's like a night shot kind of thing, and the way she's like calling out, it seemed like her accent was slipping into, and maybe during that Some Like It Hot blow up, I'm not sure, but
the night vision thing I'm curious about, because I don't know if this is a commentary or a coincidence, and you will have no idea what I'm talking about because you are a good person, David Fowley.
Oh,
but
boy.
when Paris Hilton's sex tape came out, you know, 18 years ago, or whatever, One Night in Paris, there was a scene involving her and whatever the guy was she was with, and it's a night vision scene, and you see her in all of her glory, and she is very kind of like veiny with those like kind of those like cat eyes.
Yeah.
And it's uncanny how much the couple minutes that we see of her reminded me of the way that we see Paris Hilton in that movie, who is another famous, you know, blonde icon in the culture, who, you know, people like to deconstruct and analyze, and they're, you know, fascinated by her. And Alex Dean made a fantastic documentary about her.
Yeah.
If she had, I want to see Alexandra Dean make the Marilyn Monroe documentary.
There we go. There you go. Have it done. So I get the criticism, and I think it's still like a very compelling, and that being said, uncomfortable movie. I don't know how. I mean, it'd be very interesting to see how it'll be received by ordinary Netflix viewers. I don't even know.
Watch it.
I don't think they're going to watch it.
they're going to turn it on. They're going to see this extended, this, like, it opens with the 15-minute scene of like Juliana
Yeah,
Nicholson, who's great, but she's just abusing her child and,
right.
acting all nuts, like heading towards a fire. Uh, People, I think, are going to like fast forward a lot to get to the Maryland stuff. And like, I don't even know what this is.
Well, one of the things, and that's why I'm kind of sad that it is on Netflix, is, I would rather this be something that people would go pay and go out to a movie theater and see and seek it out, just because here, this is one of the things that Ana de Armas was complaining about and was fearing, is that, there's going to be, naked nipple memes all over the place, because people are just going to go to those sections of the movie because it's streaming on Netflix, take a screenshot and put it up all over the internet. um, yeah, they're probably going to do that, Anna, because that's the movie that you and Dominic made.
But I mean, I kind of understand that, but Ana de Armas has been naked in so many other movies. There's that joke from uh not Welcome to Mooseport. It was one of those movies, but it was Sarah Jessica Parker was an actress who'd taken off her clothes in a lot of movies. And I think William H. Macy had at one point had said when her character suddenly decides she's not going to do nudity anymore, he's like, what's the big deal? People can draw her body from memory.
wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that this kind of movie kind of drives that home, is that that's what she was known for, is her body, her looks. And in this movie, she's kind of, treated like a pinball and just bounced between one bad experience to the next.
And I feel it's almost a a puzzle, like a meta puzzle that we won't know the solution to for probably a couple of decades. I want to know how Ana de Armas feels about this movie and what it was like to make it, because what I got from this is the Marilyn Monroe movies that I love, in which she's a shining star and she's funny and
Mhm,
capable and gives great performances off screen. It was a damn nightmare.
mhm.
In this movie, Ana de Armas is playing an exploited sex pot, in scenes where she's being raped and beaten up and asked to prance around, naked and all of this other stuff. It's very dehumanizing. But how does she feel about that? As an
Yeah,
actress who's, on the rise in Hollywood, does she feel exploited? Are there people behind the scenes exploiting her in order to make this, thing that's not supposed to be titillating, guys, we swear, but ends up being, it's almost like a porn compilation of, rough sex in a lot of
yeah,
ways. And when I say
yeah.
sex, I mean rape, which is not sex. It's something completely different.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I am definitely a less is more kind of guy. So I don't really think this needs to be NC-17. I think there's a lot that can be imagined that's even more horrific, um, in our minds. So yeah, this, even though I like the movie, I think it didn't need to be NC-17. I think that we could have, done without some several minutes of nudity, but just because after a while it's not, there's nothing, pardon me, titillating about it. It's more just, in a way, I was thinking about this. In a way, I feel like when she is naked, she is at, it feels like she is at her most, like, that's the time where she's at her most, like, I guess, when she experiences the most freedom from this Marilyn Monroe identity. And she's just, Norma Jean, and it's just kind of stripped of that, that Marilyn Monroe role. um
Well, it's interesting because Marilyn Monroe is sort of a personality or a costume that she puts on.
right.
So being naked is, I mean, that's a really interesting idea. I love that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
and even in when she's really fractured and having a hard time, whether it be because of drugs or just the her psyche and everything, she needs help conjuring Marilyn Monroe, with when that would either be the makeup artist or whatever assistance she has. I mean, she has to have this mantra of, come on, I need you to come through, or whatever she says, I forget, but she needs to conjure Marilyn Monroe in order to cope to the next thing. And that's, it's almost like Norma has become, somewhat codependent on Marilyn Monroe, and I wish that that was explored a little bit more. But I gleaned that, and I thought that that was one of the more interesting aspects of the movie too.
if she had only, been better to Khonshu, she wouldn't have had to, sorry, Moon Knight joke, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's Blonde. I mean, it's not funny, but I found this movie to be very darkly funny for all the wrong reasons. Good example, by the time we see the third fetus in her womb starting to form, I was like, that's not going to work out. And I, kind of tittered to myself, because this is the kind of movie that I feel like it revels in this idea, because if you do know anything about Marilyn Monroe, she never had any kids.
Right.
So we know this kid is not going to end up well.
Right.
And it's horrifying, but it's like gallows humor. It's not funny, but to me it was funny.
Yeah. That's I can relate to that. There was definitely many moments throughout the movie like that.
And Marilyn Monroe is not a joke. And that's I feel like this movie, it's a serious film that doesn't take its subject seriously. And that's what's so frustrating to me, because I think visually, again, and even with the same performances, I think because I did not like what the movie was doing, I was more zeroed in on how unimpressed I was with Ana de Armas. I think with a better script, I probably would have been like, I'm on board. Take me places.
Yeah, I agree. With a better script, I would have liked it even more than I do. So There we go.
Well, I'm glad you appreciate it. I'm glad that we got to talk about it. And I'm going to be reading that book next year. I don't have time this year, but and I'm ordering it, all 753 pages. So I'll report back when I find out what the hell happened between page to screen.
Sounds good.
But all right, thank you, sir. David Fowley of Keeping It Real. I'll catch you later.
Thank you. See ya. Bye.
Bye.